Be the Talk, episode 295, featuring Marine Tanguy. Welcome to Be the Talk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Marine Tanguy. Marine, are you ready to talk?
I'm ready. Thank you so much for having me.
Marine Tanguy directed her first gallery at age 21 and opened her first gallery in Los Angeles at age 23. MTArt is the first artist agency promoting influential visual artists and specializing in talent management, building, growing, and accelerating careers. Marine was recently awarded the Forbes 2018 30 Under 30 Europe Art and Culture Award. She is a thought leader, writer, and frequent speaker on contemporary art. Marine Tanguy, welcome to the talk.
Thank you so much.
You've given multiple talks. One is called, the more recent one, How Social Media Visuals Affect Our Minds. The other is called How Artists Can Transform Our Cities. And I love how in the most recent talk, it's really you're bemoaning the fact that the Louvre has about 10% or 30% of the Instagram reach as Kim Kardashian, who posts a different type of loosely considered art on her Instagram feed. And you basically compare and contrast the two and make some recommendations for how to create a more visually healthy environment. Is that a fair summary? I'd love for you to take us behind the talk, Marine.
Yes, very fair summary. So obviously I'm very passionate about how inspiring art is and how that transforms us, that makes us happier, that makes us more inspired every day. Sadly, the reality is not that. So currently your young girl is spending 5 hours on Instagram a day in the Western world, so America and England, for instance. And she's merely looking at a content like Kim Kardashian, which for anyone who's not looking at it is cosmetics, bottoms, boobs, and things like this. The issue with that is, as funny as it may sound, this is actually affecting her mental health. It's creating more anxiety, body consciousness, and it's just simply not making her happy. Instead, if you look at all the studies that were conducted when people were surrounded by nature or art, it's doing the exact opposite. It's actually making them a hell of a lot happier, healthier, relating to other people and seeing different perspective of the world. So it's something very, very good in that sense. So obviously the challenge is at the time of my talk, she had 116 million followers, and then the Louvre has barely 1 million. Luckily now the Louvre has double, which is 2 million, but this is still 70 times less, which is absolutely enormous. So what I'm very passionate, and it seems to be a similar job for you, is how can we make sure to raise awareness towards the content that actually benefit to us much more? And how can we make sure that everything we've learned in Hollywood marketing, promotion, marketing can be applied to basically a content that's a lot more inspiring? A lot of my artists discuss contents like social diversity, climate change, refugee crisis, so things that actually are things that we need to think about. And I guess I find everything I've learned in LA and Hollywood really interesting, because I feel that if we start understanding those marketing platforms, then hopefully we can pull them towards the content that's necessary. That's that in a very summarized way.
Yeah, well, this is really interesting. You're getting a lot of fist pumps from the green room. I'm watching our guests in the green room. You can't see this right now in the Be the Talk listeners. We have this on a broadcast right now. There's a lot of resonance with what Marine is talking about. Here's kind of my take on this is really interesting, because when I was growing up back in the dark ages, in terms of visual content, people would, in my environment, they'd say, don't look at that. That's not, in the way that women were portrayed in magazines and things like that. They say, don't look at that. And that was kind of their way of shielding negative visual content. That's not necessarily what you're saying here, but this is an argument for a similar thing of, let's look at the things that elevate ourselves. Let's look at the things that elevate people. And you actually have scientific studies on what happens when we're consuming if you're parenting right now. If you got teenage girls, teenage boys, preteen girls, preteen boys, there's evidence that says if we're filling our Instagram feed with Kim Kardashian and all these other kind of fake feeds in a sense, fake visuals of modified bodies and all of that, it's not good for us. And it's not just from the old school kind of moral take only. It's all of these other things about, there's no nature, and it's breeding all of this discontent and maybe body shaming and all these other things that you're bringing into it. Why not look at real art instead? Why not look at the Louvre? Why not find out what we can do to be fighting a fair standard instead of an unfair standard? Marine, I may have taken that in a little bit of a strange direction, but I'd love to hear your take on that as well.
No, I love it. I love seeing people being passionate about that subject. I think it's exactly that, where there's a few issues here. That's the reason I compared looking at visuals in the same way that you eat food. For me, you don't eat 5 hours of junk food a day, or I would hope you not, because it's probably not the best thing you can do. But actually here, that's technically what you're doing. And I'm only counting what you see on social media. I'm not counting adverts when you go outside, and I'm not counting the way basically that surrounds you. So here comes basically the divide, where on the one hand you have now a lot of young people who wants to be loved, and we all go through that. I want to be respected, I want to be loved, so we want to post content that therefore we think is going to engage our audiences. Someone like Kim Kardashian, and I'm not just pointing my finger at her, I think it's a way wider issue, is therefore doing two things. Not only she is promoting a content that is not an idea, and by not being an idea, you need more of it. If I eat good food, I'm, obviously satisfied. I don't need to eat every 2 seconds after that. If you eat something like Haribo's, which I love, or junk food, it doesn't satisfy you, so you have to go back at it every 2 seconds. That's basically what she's doing with that kind of content. The second thing is that she's also saying the way to be loved is by, being overtly sexualized, and is by promoting myself in that way. That's really what I found incredibly scary. So I did a study with some data scientists, and actually on me wearing a bikini with my bottom in a bikini, which obviously my mother was in despair of that matter. But the idea was that picture got viewed, the most viewed picture, it became the most viewed picture that I had over 8 years of Instagram. And
now here's where I got to jump in. Were you expecting that outcome? Was that kind of almost like a bait, or were you despairing as a result of that? Were you really surprised, or did you kind of do that to prove your own point that if you post that kind of a photo on your own Instagram feed, that it's going to be instantly the number one feed in your 8-year Instagram history?
I mean, I think I expected it to be noticed, but I didn't expect it to be what it became. And in terms of the study, what's interesting is that it's more women who looked than men.
That's very interesting.
Well, that's where the anxiety and body consciousness comes from. And instead, men have the same, where it's a comparison system. So if I post a picture like this, it creates even more anxiety. So here there's two things. One, if I don't have a stable group of friends, and I'm lucky to be a little bit older, and obviously I have investors in my business, so I can't post too many pictures of myself in a bikini. I would therefore feel, okay, that's the way to be loved. So I will start posting more of that content. That's me as a poster. The second thing is that you have young girls, therefore, watching this, comparing themselves. And that's something that the good news of art, or in my head in ideas, is that it kind of encourages you to be unique, encourages you to be different, and encourages you to therefore create dialogue between those differences. Something that this is comparable. So you're comparing, does she has enough cellulite or not at all? Does she have skinny legs? So that's comparable. Comparing yourself to other people is literally what creates the most amount of you feeling not really well about it. Like, we've all been through that, just if you start looking at people, their lifestyle, and you start comparing more directly, this is not a source of happiness. If you embrace differences, if you embrace dialogues, if you start building yourself for what you are in that sense, you're much likely to be a much happier person. So here it's not just the person that consumes that's being affected, but it's also the person that posts. Because I think if I was 10 years younger and I was being more appreciated for my bum in the bikini than my intellectual content, I may feel encouraged to post most of that content. And that's what you're basically seeing as a circle of content that's being more and more posted.
I think this is really interesting, and maybe I'm reading a little too much into that. There was an awful lot there. There's too much that we can unpack. But what I just thought that I heard you kind of almost insinuate, or what I'm reading into that is, the purpose of art is really to encourage diversity, a diversity of ways to see the world, different ways of expressing ourselves, different ways of maybe dressing or combining, clothing and fashion and all of that. And it was just so fascinating because everybody, once you post that picture of the bikini, all of a sudden you get deluged with all of the likes, all of that stuff, which makes you feel a false sense of love. And it works against art because you're going to all of a sudden, once you do that, as you found, and maybe you can emotionally, perhaps a part of you can attest to, it's just from this experiment, it's harder to do something artistic, to do something different, to do something that's a little, provocative in terms of against the norm. And all of you want, there's probably this pressure that even you felt to just post bathing suit photos for, ongoing, even though that works against your goals. And the tie-in to art being a way of diversifying and doing things different and being not afraid to flaunt expectations, that is very ironic for me to realize that the more this kind of photo goes up and the more pressure that we feel, the less artistic that we could arguably be.
And I think it's also realizing the responsibility that we all have in posting, not just, I just listened to the previous speaker in that sense, but not just a type of person, but all of us, because ultimately, we are defining our visual landscape, by populating, our social media. It's like if I'm influencing what your eyes will see, and, psychologically, I'm basically influencing you in terms of what the world looks like. There's a reason why visuals are much more accessible to us than words. We learn to read years down the line in comparison of how much we take as babies. And that's a big influence in how it shapes you as a person and what you think you may want and what you think you may crave out of what you see. So I think that's really what I'm appealing, is that we all feel insecure, but I'm just asking for not acting on it, especially if you're someone who has a voice, because you end up basically harming people. And it doesn't sound harmful, but it is actually just as harmful in terms of the content. And I think we just at the start of actually understanding how harmful it is to your audiences in that sense.
Well, this is interesting because, this is highly nuanced right now, but at the same time, even in the last 12 to 18 months after, I think, the Me Too movement as an example, and I'm not making a direct comparison, but in terms of the privilege of power and the systemic things and the actresses and all of the things that happen, my point is we have such a higher level of awareness, sophistication, and what's entailed in some of these systemic things now versus 2 years ago before a lot of this stuff happened. And what I'm starting to read in and see in what you're talking about, Marine, is it's almost like the visuals that we post as a form of, and I may not be articulating this right, but it's almost like every time we post something of ourselves, it's almost like a social justice thing in terms of, do we choose to post something that is going to incite, flattering kinds of envy from everybody else. It's almost like a narcissistic awareness versus, this is my nice vacation and I'm blessed and I hope that this brightens your day. And I worked on my abs and I'm a little bit ripped and I want the accountability versus, picture after picture of unrealistic things. I think that there's the beginning of a languaging, and maybe you're a lot farther down the road, but I think that maybe 10 years or even 10 months from now, or somewhere in between, there's going to be more of a recognition of, looking at somebody, the whole of what somebody's sending out there and realizing, is this healthy? Is this not? Should this be almost socially discouraged a little bit? What are your thoughts on that?
So we're launching a big campaign across billboards in London with quite a few people here in London on visual diets, and this is going to be in January. And it's about the fact that it's like your 5 a day. So hopefully inspiring people to look at inspiring visuals as they start the day. I would love that. I think the Me Too movement is a good example of something going viral if you do it well. I think here it's, again, just being aware that we can all be visual role models and we have to lead by examples for it. And therefore we just have to make sure that we're putting the best content out there, and anything that is, and it's always questioning before you post, like, why am I posting? Is that because I want to share something that I think is beneficial to you as a people, which is ultimately the reason why you want to post something? Or is it because I'm insecure and I have different needs? And at that point, maybe, bring your mom or your friends, because they may be better people to deal with it. So I think it's just that self-awareness. And I think it's the same when you consume it. When you start scrolling through an account addictively and you keep on going back about it, just again, I'm addicted to sweets. Like, just have a way of awareness that maybe you've consumed too many of it during that day and you should step out. If you start seeing some mental sign that you're not feeling really great about yourself, and it's been already 30 minutes of that content, have awareness. Like, 5 hours a day is enormous. Like, it's so much time. And I think for us also who, and that's the issue of my industry that obviously we're battling for, is my industry hasn't taken social media seriously for a very long time. And ultimately it's also for all of us in the cultural space to be realizing that this is where people spend most of their time. And therefore this is where we should spend, again, our time for the content. It's important to kind of look at audiences on a way larger spectrum and not having also an echo chamber in that sense, because our industry is just as responsible for not having promoted as much good content on those platforms. But again, within those 5 hours, I want people to feel a lot more meaningful, inspired, and thought-provoked than what's currently happening.
Well, we've been enjoying this conversation with Marine Tanguy. We've been talking more about her second and more recent talk, How Social Media Visuals Affect Our Minds. Really fascinating conversation. We're going to pivot over to you, Talk Universe, in the Blitz round. Hey, Talk Universe. I hope you've been enjoying today's episode with today's guest. But you know what? Many people want more than that. Many people that listen to Be the Talk actually want to give a talk. And if that's you, you're not alone. Listen to the rest of this podcast. At the end, I'll have a free resource for you just for listening. And we're back with Marine Tanguy. It is time for the Blitz round. I'm going to ask her a series of either or questions in the preparation, related to the preparation and performance of her recent talks. Are you ready, Marine?
Okay. I'm a bit scared, but I'm ready.
Oh, no need to be scared. First question off. Were you invited to speak or did you apply?
So yeah, I was invited to speak for this one. The first one was in discussion with the university we were working with. The second one, I started my company saying, this is the reason I founded my company, to give influence to visual artists. And that's because I want them to have as much influence as Kim Kardashian, but with more inspiring content. So the platform TED in Switzerland approached me. And I must say that I didn't have that much research on it at the time. So I had to basically go down and research and make sure that all the facts I was saying were consistent. But they were right. I actually think that subject was even more, it kind of made me think even more about why I was doing the things I was doing. Yeah,
well, talk about the research that you did, because it's really powerful and you make some, bold claims backed by research. And I think that's a piece that a lot of lesser talks don't do. We there's a, once you're accepted, A lot of people unfortunately use the opportunity as kind of a personal commercial as opposed to a way to bring these true ideas forth. And that really often requires research to make sure that it's not just an opinion, but an actual fact. So what did you do to research?
So there's also mental health research, and that's very helped for us with NHS, which is the health system that we have here in England. So they will look basically at the amount of time people were spending on apps. We were able to kind of access those facts, access the timings, access the impact of it. Instagram was flagged as the worst, and then we were able to basically look at what the content we could look at into it. This was matched with the Turing Institute, who basically had started with a research that's really interesting on why do we need an environment that surrounds us that's inspiring. And actually, once you start thinking of that, you can bring it into a digital of what, again, you should be consuming of that. So then that helped me in scanning the data, like a similar thing with my bikini picture. We were able to be saying, like, how many people were looking at it? What's the level of addiction and obsessiveness that you go about it? That's much more small scale. Because you basically have, like, I asked my friends who were influencers to also help me. It's only so many people like you can ask that to access the analytics. But that was really handy because I'm lucky to have people that have let me into their accounts and to the analytics, and we could therefore go at that. And then we basically also ask people to look at different types of content daily and see how they felt after that, which is also more quantitative research than the big data side. That's more, NHS will be more on the big scale, and then all of this will be more like surveys and study cases. But actually, as much as it was small scale, the answer is always the same. So it's one of those things that you think you have an opinion, but by the minute you expose people to this kind of content versus the user type of content, it's black and white. You will not feel great here, and you'll feel a lot healthier here. So.
Well, Talk Universe, I encourage you, don't shy away from doing the research that you need to prove the points and spread the ideas. It's a whole lot harder to overlook and dismiss when you realize that a talk is based on real research and data. And for a lot of places that they will just ask you that in order to get accepted. You really do need to have research and data and whatnot. My last question, what was the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or before you spoke?
So what was the most unexpected? I'm always quite ambitious with what we're going to do. And my artist, because I work with mad people who are incredibly smart but completely crazy. So my artist wanted an augmented reality experience to happen on stage, which is at the end. Luckily, the edit was quite cool because the whole thing glitched in the dark. It finally happened, and it was almost like a hooray moment because I generally had given hope that it would never happen, and I even prepared to make a joke about it. So that was that. I think also I'm actually someone that is very introverted still about all these things, and I love when people start laughing and they start responding to you, because ultimately the reason I want to be on that stage is to again pass on the content, and it is so lovely when you start and people are really interacting and you really sense that they're on the board. By the minute that happens, I'm sure it's the same for all speakers, you feel that that's it. You've kind of set the stage to doing something that they're going to think differently about. So for me, that's always that case, is when the audience starts interacting, it changes everything.
Well, we've been enjoying this Blitz round with Marine Tanguy. You can go to our show notes page at BeTheTalk.com to watch both of her talks. We'll have links there. Her first talk, How Artists Can Transform Our Cities. The second that we've been focused on right now, How Social Media Visuals Affect Our Minds, as well as we will have a link to her agency. It's MTArt.agency. MT for Marine Tanguy, art.agency. And we'll be back in just a moment with Marine Tanguy's final word of advice for Talk Universe. Hey, Talk Universe, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you want to give the talk to change the world, but you don't know how or even where to start, no problem at all. go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted for my new 5-day email course that'll show you how. Absolutely free. Just go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted. And we're back with Marine Tanguy. What's your final word of advice?
Well, I think in life, sadly, this is going to be something so boring, but just working really hard. I think, as you said, with the research, I think being surrounded by people who work really hard and working very hard yourself, your brain just keeps on coming up with discoveries that you never expected. It's very boring, but actually I think that's the solid foundation of everything.
Well, Marine Tanguy, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe. Thanks for listening to Be the Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.